Okay. Therefore, I'm a postdoc working with Tanya and Oliver at Manchester University on a project called Transnational Live Citizenship, which was originally planned to be conducted in Kenya, Nairobi, in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and Khartoum, Sudan. And the original plan was to go for 40 days participant observation to map potential participants and gatekeepers, but that was not possible because of the pandemic. And in this discussion, I will try to discuss what challenges, what opportunities the restrictions have put on our project. Therefore, the original aim, you can see the whole project was to understand the ways in which the diaspora population embrace, subvert and refine ideas, narratives and practices of citizenship, and how they establish different form of political belongings in relation to their country of origin, to the country of residence, and the wider transnational diaspora community. And accordingly, we have these three research questions, which I can omit to discuss. And I will focus on what challenges and opportunities we had in conducting. Therefore, the first was the pre-interview phase, and that was the planning to move from the planned in-person fieldwork to the virtual one. Therefore, at this stage, we had to decide as a team what implications this will have to our research questions and the analysis that we conduct. The main question was, can we answer our research questions using the virtual fieldwork? And then the next thing that we have discussed was what equipment and software we need to use, and then how security of sensitive information can be preserved. And the next was, if this can be done, then how can we recruit our potential participants? And then the biggest problem was how to have informed consent. We had previously discussed that among our participants, it's very hard to have conditions currently prevailing in the region. It was not possible to have a written consent. Therefore, we agreed that we'll have a verbal consent. And to have a verbal consent remotely, we'd have some challenges, and we have discussed how to conduct those. And then was how the technology will affect their space and time. And accordingly, then what we have done is there were problems on the logistics. When I say logistics, I mean, how do we recruit and how do we gather information? Therefore, what we have discussed is we have agreed that interviews will be conducted via Zoom. And then we had to carefully think about how can we still do the analysis using the data collection. And then we have also decided that how respondents will have a private and uninterrupted space for their interview. Therefore, during the pandemic, the remote mapping process offers unique opportunities And this include, we have two challenges. The first challenge is the volatile political condition in the region, especially in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And particularly at this time, there was a condition of conflict brewing in Ethiopia, and that would affect the perception of the participants or the willingness of the participants to take part in our project. Therefore, we had to carefully craft how to approach our participants. Therefore, the recruitment process was the longest and tiresome because sometimes it took us between 5 and 8 links to reach at the final prospective participants. The actual was nobody was believing nobody. And this is good. It's not because of the pandemic, but generally because of the current condition. But to worsen the matter, I was not there to convince the people and have a face-to-face communication and discussion with the gatekeepers so that they can believe me that I was free from what they were thinking. My being from Eritrean background has put an extra pressure on that, because the Ethiopians were thinking that I will be biased, and the Eritreans were thinking I was from the government of Eritrea position. Therefore, I had to have extra pressure, calling several times to convince first the gatekeepers so that they can recruit or potential participants, and then I can contact them and discuss with them. Once the right gatekeepers were contacted, I had to send the simplified participant information sheet to every gatekeeper so that they can share with their potential participants. And we had certain feedback. However, some of them, once they have agreed to participate, then they changed their mind. Particularly, this was observed from the Ethiopian side because of my Eritrean background. I don't think the restrictions and lockdown had put any pressure on that. I think that though I was from distance, I would have the same challenge if I were in Nairobi at this time. Therefore, there was a biggest challenge. To give you some flavor of that, the negotiation was the longest one. Once one participant has agreed to participate, then I had to call at least 3 times to make sure that they are understood and have informed decision to participate in our project. The first one was to introduce myself and briefly introduce if they have read the information. To your surprise, many of them, they didn't read it. This is because of the cultural background of the Ethiopian and Eritreans, that they prefer oral information rather than written one. Therefore, I had to go through each and individual line to explain to them. Therefore, it took me between 15 to 20 minutes on every call. Therefore, if you multiply that one by 3, it would take about 1 hour per participant before they agree to participate. Once they have agreed, then I I had to take another call to let them know that now I can send the full information sheet to them so that they can read, and if they have questions, they could ask me. Finally, some of them, I sent them the interview guide in advance so that they can see the questions and they can prepare for that. And if they have any question, they can contact me at any time. Okay, therefore, the lessons learned from that one is we have to plan on how to recruit and data gather, and then always have a contingency plan, because if you don't have any, what we have done is we had a contingency plan that we could go. If that is not clear, then once everything is cleared up, then I will go for the field work. And then we need to be patient and clear when approaching participants. I use layman. For those you are conducting, if you want to coordinate and across different times, I found this one interesting, though I haven't used it. That was, let me see. Oh, sorry. This one is an important one to arrange an online meeting, but since my participants were not able to do that one, I haven't used it, but it proved one of the easiest way to do. Okay, during the interview then, the interview basically is not different from what we have done is it's less secure, and we have to conduct it carefully. The relative anonymity increases the presentation of self-authenticity, and they give me rich data. There were problems of unstable and unreliable internet, which I had to, again, reschedule it, and being virtual that had allowed me. And then we have to create a comfortable atmosphere in that sense. Therefore, we have also encountered a disruptive environment in which children in their house come and disrupt, and the interview was interrupted several times. And the other was mobile data was very problematic. Okay.
Okay. So the next speaker is Nicole Bonino from the University of Virginia.
Hello, everyone. So as Malte said, my name is Nicole Bonino, and I'm assistant professor of Spanish at the University of Virginia and visiting research fellow at the University of Manchester. As you can see from the title of my presentation, I like to define art and literature as active archives. When we think about archives, we might imagine a dark basement where there are some books and manuscripts that we need to read by using glass to flip the pages. And this sometimes creates a disconnection between the researcher and the material, and it makes it hard to find real life application of the material that we are investigating. What art and literature do, according to me, is to be active, dynamic, and living archives which are able to collect past, contemporary, and future dynamics affecting humanity. Today, I'm gonna give you some ideas and example about Open Access Museum and social media who can be integrated in your research, digital repositories, art, and literature. My goal for this presentation is to offer you some examples to create a methodological paradigm that can be applicable to virtual research in the humanities. It is my understanding that everyone here is working on different time periods and geographical areas. And so what I have to do today is to filter my presentation based on my research topic, particularly urban migration in Buenos Aires through literature and art. But the idea and the hope is to give you some some ideas and some example that you can apply to your specific research field. During this month of lockdown, my research mantra has been, do not try to do the same things in other ways, but rather find alternative ways to do new things differently. And this is the approach that I'm incorporating right now into my research. Talking about museums and social media, I would like to share with you a project created by the Museo de Arte Moderno de Buenos Aires called the Museo Moderno at Home. Every week there is a topic, not necessarily connected to the pandemic, and then scholars and artists are invited to participate. Everything is free and open to the public. They even created an Instagram account, hashtag Museo Moderno en Casa, where you can follow their stories, their video, and their virtual exhibitions. Also, several libraries and research institutes opened their digital repositories. They digitalize their material and everything is accessible. Here you have a list of centers that I work with from North America, but I'm sure that you can easily find a lot of other opportunities more relatable to your specific research field. And I will be more than happy to discuss that later during the question section. Photography is another incredible medium to do research. Imagine how many pictures you take when you travel, when you're doing research somewhere, if you're able to be there in person. Then what happens is that sometimes all these pictures get lost in the archives of your computer and you forget that you took them. But if you took that picture, that means that you felt a certain connection with that object or their circumstances. So I believe that now it's the perfect moment to retrieve that kind of research support and incorporate it into your work. And this is not only my idea, it's actually at the base of the idea of Denise Sepulveda and Francisco Ortiz for their project Visual Narratives, created here at the University of Manchester. And I will be more than happy to discuss this more in details later. Plastic art is another resource that I use a lot in my research. On this slide, you can see on the left a conventillo. Conventillo and Villa Miserias are unrepresented, unregulated residential areas in Buenos Aires, Argentina. If you're not familiar with this situation, you might be more familiar with the Portuguese term favelas or the English slums. What they have in common is that all these residential realities are created from scratch using recycled material and discarded material. And so on the left, on the right, you have a collage made by Argentinian author Antonio Berni, who uses the same principle of recycling to discuss social, economical, and cultural issues connected to unregulated residential area. And the way he does that is to use recycling using wood, paint, industrial trash, cardboard, scrap metal, and so on to recreate the same feeling and the same situation and denounce the problems that these unrepresented immigrant communities have to face on a daily basis. Finally, very connected to what I just explained is this novel, Villa Miseria también es América. As you can see from the title, again, we're talking about Argentinian slums, specifically communities of immigrants who are trying to reestablish a new life in the target country. Both the Villa, the slum described in this novel, is fictional, and the book was published 6 years ago, as you can see, but it is sadly still very updated. And the topic of this book is to discuss the dichotomy between invisible communities and the official city. And you might think, well, if they're invisible, they must be very well hidden by the city. And unfortunately, this is not the case. They are actually absolutely part of the official city. As you can see here from this picture from Google Maps, to go from Villa 31 is one of the most well-known slums in Buenos Aires, to the Four Seasons Hotel, it would take you 12 minutes by car, but just because you would need to take a huge detour. it is actually very close to two of the most, the richest neighborhood in Buenos Aires, which is Retiro y Recoleta. And if you're still not persuaded by the power of literature as a mine of material that can be used for research connected to real life applications, then take a look at this picture where we can absolutely see the dichotomy between immigrant communities, hidden communities, and the official city. And this division is not only psychological and cultural and economical, but also physical. In fact, there is a huge highway and also a railway that actually divides Villa 31 from the rest of the city. And so it is my, my hope to show you how literature has a fundamental role in describing research that is absolutely contemporary. And I'm not suggesting to go back to consider literature science as it happened during the colonial era or during naturalism, but I do want to underline the fact that in a time where it's very hard to travel, we can find resources from social media, from art, and even from books published 60 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicole. Maybe we should just continue on to Erica, who's an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology at Macalester College.
Good afternoon, good morning. It's 7:30 here where I am in the US. So thank you for the invitation. And I should know better that I should have a PowerPoint presentation with nice pictures, but I don't. I've been teaching for 6 months and that was a lesson learned, but I failed today. So I'm asking you to bear with me and listen carefully. Okay. As Malte said, I'm Erica Buse. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. My scholarship, it's focused, or it's around motherhood among immigrant women and how they juggle race, class, gender hierarchies from the country of origin and from the country of reception. And I'm at that point that I have control over what I want to do. I haven't been that successful getting big grants, so I use small grants that at the very beginning that was like a drawback. However, that gives me more flexibility to adjust the process, and that proved to be very useful during this time. At this moment, I'm conducting 5 different projects. One that is about construction of Peruvianness through folk dance here in Minnesota in the US. The second one is redefinition of motherhood among Mexican deported mothers in Mexico, Tijuana in particular. The third one is motherhood practices, values and perceptions among middle-class Peruvian women in binational and biracial partnerships in Belgium. And Lorena Izaguirre, who is also attending this workshop, is part of this project. Practices, the fourth one is practices of mutual aid among undocumented Latinx immigrants in times of COVID in Philadelphia. And the fifth one is conceptualizations of motherhood among women who opted for the voluntary interruption pregnancy in Uruguay. As you see, the connecting thread is motherhood, whether to choose to be mothers and when you're a migrant mother and when you choose not to have more children. And that's why all these different projects. And what I'm talking today is what happened and after March 11, Monday, March 11, 2020, when everything changed. I was on sabbatical since June 2019. I did field work from then up to January 2020, and I decided to take a break in February to resume doing my field work in March. Silly me, why did I do that? Why did I miss 1 month of work? But anyhow, that's what happened. And so I was at that point in which after that day or after that week, I thought, what am I going to do? Because all the trips that I had planned, that I was going back to Tijuana, Mexico, I was going to Montevideo, Uruguay, I was going to Peru, to Belgium, everything was canceled. So I thought in this moment of panic and hyperventilation, I was like, oh my goodness, what's happening. So I decided to do something that to readjust the fieldwork that I had planned, and took, I will say minutes, but it was days, to calm down and rethink of all the project. And for some reason, Victoria Reyes' ethnographic toolkit concept came to my mind. It's an article she published in 2018, and putting aside the premise of the rational actor that it's embedded in that article, there is something that is very useful, particularly for me as a feminist researcher, that it's an ethnographer that goes and to the field and spend time with people, and whenever it's possible to do an interview, they will come, the interviews will come. Instead of me seeking out the interviews, I will take pictures as a former photographer, my former past or my past as a photographer. That's also something that I do. So I had to redefine everything, right? So I thought, okay, Victoria Reyes has this concept that it's thinking about the idea of reflexivity and how, as a core element of qualitative research, how important it is when you do research. And she points out that nobody has, or very few people has talked about how you activate your tools when you are doing fieldwork, how your race, your class, your gender, your age, your socioeconomic background, your social capital, how you activate that, right? And you may wonder, why, Erika, how is that connected with this work? What I did is to think, okay, what are the characteristics I have that are visible and invisible to do the research that I want? So I listed the things that, I study motherhood, right? I'm a mother. I have an 8-year-old child. So I can talk about that as relate with people. Then I study migrants. I'm a migrant myself. I'm in a different country and I live in another country as well. So I can relate using that information. As I said, I'm putting aside the rational actor premise of this whole concept, but we have to be strategic when we are doing, when we are going to the field, right? And so this idea of how to do research was key, even though Victoria Reyes' piece doesn't talk about how to do the planning, because as Messinga has pointed out, everything has changed, and the most important thing now, it's the moment of planning, right? Planning, it's taking a more importance in this context. So as part of the planning, thinking about all the resources that you have. One of the resources I do have is that because as an ethnographer, I talk to everyone, so I get to know people. And at the end, that proves also to be very useful in how to do research. So what I did, and now I've lost track of I had typed everything that I was going to say, and I lost my point. But one thing that I did was to start volunteering. One of the things that since I work with immigrants, and here I am in Minnesota, in the middle of the US, so I decided, well, one of the things that, since I cannot go and talk to people, I may volunteer, and I contact grassroots organizations here in the Twin Cities, but also in other places. And that's the positive side of COVID-19, that now I can volunteer, and actually I'm volunteering at an organization in Philadelphia, the New Century Movement, that provides resources to immigrants in the city of Philadelphia. So I'm volunteering at an organization over there. And since I have 1 minute left, thank you, Malte. I've done in the past 7 months, 3 different types of data collection, or I have used 3 different types of data collection methods. 1 is online interviews, 2 is participant observation, and 3rd, group interviews. The online interviews, as Messinga said, one of the most important things is to plan, because that will take you more time. he mentioned the interruptions, and as ethnographer and interested in family, actually that proved to be very informative for the observation part, because you get to see people at home. Most of us are locked down, so most of us are at home. So the interruptions, seeing the kids coming in or having the interviews, many people do the interviews at home in their bedrooms or in a private place. So you get to know the person through the place or the space where you are. As Nicole mentioned, space matters a lot. So that's a space in which you can also gather a lot of information that it's beyond the actual interview, right? So I combined my interview skills with my observation skills to make this happen. For the participant observation, I started doing through volunteering at grassroots organizations, and through that, I'm going to start this new project with the New Century Movement. And the point here is that it takes more time, but there are many other opportunities to conduct research, maybe a different type of research that you had originally planned. But again, thinking about the resources that you have, your own characteristics, the people you know, the people you know that know other people that can help you, vouch for you when you're doing field work, it's crucial in this particular moment, because as Audrey has mentioned, and I'm sure the ones coming will mention the same, you don't have the face-to-face interaction, so you need other people to vouch for you when you are doing field work. So that's key, and you have to be flexible, patient, and creative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erica. Very interesting. Then, are there any quick questions or to Erica's presentation? Or? No?
I do. Yeah. Erica, can you say a little bit more about the participant observations? How does that work online?
Thank you. Well, as I said, I'm volunteering at this organization, and because they are also, this is a nonprofit that it's also a grassroots organization that provides services to immigrants, and they all turned into virtual services, right? So if one of my colleagues, the one that I work with in Tijuana, volunteers at this organization, there is one project in the city of Philadelphia providing finance or money to people to pay for rent. So this organization is providing advice to immigrants to apply for this program, right? So my colleague is volunteering at this office, that it's the virtual offices, to support immigrants to fill out the forms that they have to file to get the money to pay rent. So what we are doing is to go to those sessions and work with the volunteers who are providing these services and working with immigrants directly. And by doing so, that helps us observe how the volunteers are doing the work themselves. And because they are also doing everything online, there are many moments in which they discuss what are the barriers, what are the challenges, what are the gains in doing this process virtually, and being there, gives you the opportunity to ask the question, right? And it's not the same way as being in a physical space, observing how people receive in the people that they are serving or working with into the organization, or how the volunteers or the staff go to the community and work with people. That's true, it's not the same. However, it's the possibility of at least having this space as we are doing right now. And it takes longer. I'm not answering your question directly, but this is as far as we have been doing this. And probably that will allowed us for people in the community to see us, to later conduct interviews with them.
Okay, thank you. And I think then we'll hand it over to Maria, who's an Ecuadorian anthropologist based in the UK.
Well, hello everyone. Yes, I am Ecuadorian. I live here in the UK, and my area of expertise is the Catholic Church and women. I feel a bit of a fraud now because I didn't do my field work in times of COVID. So I did it when I still had a choice of using online or face-to-face methods. And I've changed the title of my presentation because at the beginning I had it as the limitations, and I thought that sounds not very hopeful. So I've changed it to the challenges of online interviewing in enabling multi-layered storytelling. So I'm going to talk about my last research project, and it was about the sustainability of religious life in 2 regions, in East and Central Africa and in the UK and Ireland. In both projects, we used online methods, which worked successfully in Africa and less so in the UK and Ireland. Just to give you a little bit of background, this project was a collaboration between the University of Durham and the Margaret Beaufort Institute of Theology in Cambridge, and was funded by the Hilton Foundation. And when I talk about religious life, I am talking about religious sisters, Catholic religious sisters. So let's go to Africa. So the purpose of the research in Africa was to reach as many sisters as possible and include them in a conversation about the future of religious life in the region. I have to say before that, we spoke to the National Association of Sisters and we had their support. So each country has an umbrella organization that works for the sisters, that promotes their rights and helps them find funding and gives them formation. So these associations are very well trusted by the sisters. So as we said, we wanted to reach as many sisters as possible, but we realized that many sisters didn't have a stable internet connection, or they didn't even have a laptop. So to reach sisters, we decided to use WhatsApp because we saw how ubiquitous WhatsApp was, and almost all of them had a smartphone, and so we could use that. So the first part of the project was asking the sisters a question. And the question was, what is the essence of religious life for women where you live? Give us 5 examples. So 620 sisters took part, which is a big number. And as you can see from the question, it wasn't a very personal question to answer. And the sisters gave us very safe answers. From that amount of answers, only 1 mentioned sexual abuse, for example, and a handful talked about conflicts within the community. So they gave us answers that were safe and that the superiors would have approved. This was something that we had anticipated, and in the second stage of the project, we did discussion groups and we had other methods. So from this example, I want to highlight that high participation was possible because we reached participants through local and trusted organizations, because the question we asked was quite general and in a way safe. So the project in the UK and Ireland was different. Our research involved asking women who had entered religious life about their experiences. Roughly half of the women we interviewed had stayed in religious life, and half had left religious life. The women who consented to taking part were motivated by their interest in the continuity of this life, as most of them agreed that religious life was a response to a call from God. So even if they had left religious life, they still thought it was a valid way of life and wanted the continuity of it. Some of the women we interviewed were not in the UK or Ireland, so we had to use Zoom or Skype, mostly Skype. And we did 5 interviews using Skype. And these interviews were quite different from the rest. They were quite short and presented little surprises. We never thought about that because at the end we had 53 interviews. So that's a lot of material to work with. And 5 out of 53 was not much. But the topic of this panel has made me realize the challenges of interviewing in general without having established a prior relationship with participants. My previous research has always included participant observation. And when you do participant observation, you become invisible in a way. You become familiar, but you are also invisible. And people kind of get to know you and they trust you. But this was the first time that I hadn't done participant observation. And the first time I met the women was when I visited them for the interview. In practice, it meant that they didn't necessarily trust me, and gaining that trust and expecting them to tell me quite personal stories was even harder when attempting to do it remotely. So we were doing a narrative, So we wanted to do a narrative analysis of the women's journey. And my understanding of narratives is that they are contextual. They are rarely straightforward. They are constructed by layering different truths, and they are dynamic and prone to change according to the context. I believe stories are told for a public, so in a way they're a performative act. And mainly, I think storytelling is a way of explaining things to yourself and of dealing with pain and trauma. Stories that are personal and painful may be difficult to share with others, particularly unfamiliar people. It requires a degree of connection. And so the interviewer needs to build a relationship of trust with the interviewee. This relationship can come from a common purpose and similar experiences. To find these connections, small talk, shared activities, coffee and cake may be needed. These relationships require time. Interviews cannot be rushed. And the more time you dedicate to it, the richer they become. Time helps different layers to come out. So I realized that I just couldn't start talking to these women about such personal stories. I had to do things before. So we did a lot of praying and a lot of walking and a lot of talking beforehand because the topic was quite difficult. And I think I gained the trust because I had the same objective as them. I thought religious life was a valid way of life, and I was sad to see that it was disappearing in the UK. So we had that shared, that common purpose. So my experiences of online interviewing are not good. I think they present many challenges. There are connectivity problems, especially in areas of unstable networks. So I interviewed women in Africa from the UK, and the time we spent trying to connect and trying to solve all these problems was an issue. There's also the danger of who talks first and the fear of interrupting because social cues are difficult to read. There's also the distraction of having to look at oneself for the duration of the interview. And this is something I hate, just looking at yourself and seeing your gestures and the way you talk and I don't like it. And I don't know if, I think that is very distracting. But, and also, you cannot do an online interview for a long time because it is tiring. After a while, you just want to get rid of the screen. But for me, the most problematic thing is that a video cannot be stopped, cannot be paused. And the times I had to pause the interviews when I was interviewing, when I was talking to these women, because the emotions were too much, I couldn't do it while using Zoom, because if you pause it, then you have to start all over again. So I think for me, that was one of the most difficult things. So as I said, I interviewed women who had stayed, and these women had a joyous story to share, a story about the greatest love story of all. These women had given up everything and considered that they had gained so much more. They felt at home and were very happy with their lot, and they wanted to share with me and wanted to share with others. They wanted to change this perception of religious life as a sad, grey life for women who cannot get married. They told stories of, homely convents and happy sisters and family, really, and where God and prayer are at the center of their lives. Part of the interview was visiting the convent, was talking to them, was praying to them, was talking to other sisters, and that gave me a context. Now, the other sisters, the one that had left, had a difficult story to tell. So I think for them, they had also given up everything and they felt rejected. And that was very, very painful. They weren't against the religious life, but they questioned certain rules and traditions that made it impossible for them to continue that journey. It was not always clear to them why they had left. So during the interview, it was like they were explaining to themselves and explaining to me the reasons why it didn't work. They couldn't blame the community because they were still, they still had bonds with them. There were still bonds of friendship with the sisters in the community. So it was difficult. I started my interviews with a very, very simple question because I wanted them to give the interview a direction. I just asked them, tell me your story. So they gave me the story, and it was usually a story, it was very linear. It was straight and clear. For me, that was the first layer. After that, I would ask further questions, and then I would get more layers. Stories were at times painful, as I said, and I remember many times turning the recorder off. But it was not always them that started to cry. Sometimes it was me, because the stories touched things inside me that were difficult. So we spent time just sitting there in silence, in a companionable silence. After we finished the interview, I realized that the more stories would come as soon as I turned the recorder off. So after that, I would talk to them about what we were doing in Africa, or I would tell them what other sisters, other women had told me, not giving them specific examples, but just in general. And the fact that other women had gone through the same experiences would make them realize that they were not alone, or had imagined what happened to them. It validated the narrative. And then a second stage of the process would happen. They would share more details, or would change the stories. And that was amazing. So I came to realize that the women gave me first a safe story, one that wouldn't cause them pain, one that would justify what they had gone through. A true story, but not a complete one. In the second stage, the stories would become more complex and difficult to bear. Our goal was not to cause them pain, but we wanted to help them find closure and make them feel less lonely. None of these things happened when I used online interviewing. And just to finish, I want to share the words of a former sister after we sent her the final report. And this shows to me how important was the interview, the face-to-face interview. So these are her words. I remember at the end of my meeting with Maria, you said to me, I think when you read this report, you will not be lonely again. She was right. When I read the report, I finally realized that my experience is shared by many others. I am not alone. It is as if you have finally given me a voice, a platform to begin to share my experience with others. Above all else, when I read the report, I feel listened to and understood. You have validated and given authority to my story. As a result of that, all the pain, the disappointment, the striving, needing to justify myself has gone. It has been quite miraculous. It has been very healing. So to conclude, I would say that online techniques can be very effective when doing certain types of research, for example, a survey, or as the research we did in Africa, asking questions where we aren't expecting anything too personal. For other types of research, such as the one we did in the UK, online interviewing may limit the quality of the interview, especially when interviews are done with people we don't know. The challenge is to think of ways in which to recreate a more personal relationship with the interviewee, with the resources available. Perhaps multiple sessions instead of just one. Perhaps using different methods, for example, a phone call instead of staring at the screen, or maybe even meet at a cafe or for a short period, or going for a walk. Above all, it is important just to acknowledge the limitations while analyzing the data. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. So I think if there are any questions, maybe you can save them till the end, and then we can go straight to Yvonne, because time is running a little bit.
So hello, everyone. My name is Yvonne Riaño. I work as an associate professor at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And this invitation gave me the impulse to put some thoughts together about this problematic. This is pretty much work in progress, but I'd like to share them with you. So the title I give to my presentation is Research in COVID-19 Times, mainly a problem of techniques, potentials and limitations of participatory approaches and research partnerships. Now, so I'd like to start with a discussion about proximity and distance. And it is clear that COVID-19 has created unprecedented challenges for all of us to do field work and pushed us to think about new methodological approaches to overcome the problem of geographical distance. At the same time, I argue that the problem of distance is not new among social researchers. We have always struggled with the issue of how to create proximity. That is the question of how to achieve mutual trust between us and our research participants in order to gain access to the research sites. Therefore, I argue that merely focusing on discussing what techniques could replace face-to-face interviewing and direct field observation is not sufficient. These debates on how to gain trust and conduct a more ethical and less exploitative relationship have been going on for decades. Feminist and post-colonial researchers, among which I find myself, have argued that conventional methods that consider research participants as mere sources of information without any involvement in the research process create not only exploitative relationships, but also less accurate scientific knowledge. We have therefore argued for more just methods that strive to create research partnerships based on mutual respect and reciprocity. And therefore, my argument is that such approaches have great potential to overcome social and geographical distance, as well as democratizing migration research and produce more solid scientific knowledge. I therefore argue that collaborative partnerships are, during times of COVID-19, more important than ever before. But how to do that practically? There has been a lot more theoretical discussion on this topic than practical discussions. So what I'd like to do now is to present the principles of a methodology I developed before COVID by the name of Minga, which means working together in Quechua language, which I think can be quite useful to face our current challenges. So when I talk about the Minga methodology, basically I'm thinking about how we can have a reciprocal relationship. So that's the first principle. How can we have a reciprocal relationship? And I think that the potential for the future is in creating spaces of mutual learning. So not only for us researchers to learn from the exchange with our research subjects, but that we mutually learn. I think that's one first important principle. It's not about money, it's not about presence, but about how we can learn from each other. The second one is mutual recognition, which I think is a very important principle of any research partnership, in which we recognize that we are not the only ones doing research. We just do it from an academic context, but our research partners are also playing a role when they discuss it with us. Personal transformation. In my previous research, I've done these workshops with migrant women, and one of the results has been that by working together, by learning from each other's strategies and approaches, you can change yourself, you can transform yourself in the sense of empowerment. Another dimension is collective thinking, which I think is very important. Very often with our research methods, we isolate our research partners, we interview them separately, and I believe that creating spaces of collective thinking and reflective has a lot of potential for learning. And finally, access to academic spaces, This is of course pre-COVID, But my argument was that to create a relationship of trust, we have to create access to academic spaces. That means not only to go to where our research subjects are, but also to invite them into our academic spaces to discuss and debate. So in practice, what I've been doing lately is I lead a project on transnational migrant entrepreneurship in Switzerland, Spain, and Colombia. And I have conducted a research partnership with an association in Colombia by the name of Asociación de Redes. Asociación de Redes is an NGO that works with Colombians who have returned from Venezuela, who have histories of displacement in Colombia, but also who were deported by the Venezuelan government. So the partnership we created is that they all being kind of isolated, and I proposed the Minga workshops as a means of reflecting together, of sharing the stories of displacement and deportation and learning from each other. Because not only the individuals present their biographies and their experiences, but they discuss it and they learn from each other's experiences and strategies. That was one point, the basis of our reciprocal agreement. The second point is that I put the results together of all these workshops and interviews I did later, so that the association has a better basis to understand what the needs of the members are and better support. So this is before COVID. And on that basis, what happened before is that I couldn't travel to Colombia anymore. I'm Colombian myself, but I couldn't even travel. Well, digital communication via Zoom workshop is more difficult. These are people who don't always have a lot of education. So I spontaneously one day sent a WhatsApp to one of my research partners, just asking very broadly how things are going, what the situation is at the border, because they're all at the border between Colombia and Venezuela. And to my surprise, I got a WhatsApp reply in the form of audio, 3 audios actually, with a great description of what was going on, of what was happening, all of that. So I thought, this is amazing. And I decided to transcribe the information, to contact other women via WhatsApp, and the same thing occurred again, that they sent me audios, and I transcribed everything, and then sent this output to the NGO and to the members of the organization as an output for discussing. So this is what I called WhatsApp chains. I'm still exploring this method, but I was very surprised how simple technology can actually help you to get insight into what's going on and cooperate with your research partners. That's one first experience I'm trying to work on for the future during COVID. And the second experience is my PhD student, Christina Mittmasser, who's working in Switzerland with migrant entrepreneurs. And she has developed a partnership with an association called Capacity that empowers migrants through entrepreneurship. So again, she established a partnership on the basis of putting all the information that she collected together to help the leaders of Capacity better understand the needs of the participants in the project and better design programs for the future. So last week, we had a collaborative digital workshop with Capacity, where Christina presented her research results, and we then got separated in working rooms to discuss the research results. And that was very useful again for the organization to learn what was going on, where the shortcomings were, and so on. So these are just two examples of how you can actually do these digital methods very successfully when you have a solid basis of a research partnership, a relationship of trust. And this is where I'd like to conclude very simply by saying that digital techniques are great, but if you don't have a basis of trust before, that won't get you very far. So collaborative partnerships via digital techniques seems to have been, in our case, to have a great potential to overcome the problem of social and geographical distance, because we couldn't go to many of the research participants. We hope that it helps democratize research in that the members of this association were able to give us feedback on what they thought was representing the reality or not, and produce more valid scientific knowledge, because you have two kinds of experts involved in the process. Those of us who work from academia, and those of them who have their daily experiences. These two methods that we are developing, WhatsApp chains with DRTs and Zoom workshops, seem to be quite successful for our digital exchanges to create spaces of mutual learning and more valid knowledge. But again, as I say, this is all possible because we already have a strong basis of collaboration and trust. So just to finish, there are many technical challenges that I could mention, but I chose to emphasize on the challenge for all of us of how to create collaborative partnerships as a solid basis of mutual trust for successful digital exchange. So before we think of what technique, is the question of how can we researchers reciprocally offer something to our research partners for the time and effort. And this is where my argument comes. I think that if we think of how we can create spaces of mutual learning via workshops or via common reading of something, or pictures, or producing pictures, discussing them in internet, but something that that brings in trust and reciprocity. I think that there is a lot of potential to think here about ideas, and I think there is much creative potential in times of COVID-19 to think and to experiment about how to reciprocally collaborate. And with this, I finish. Here you find some information on our research project if you're interested, as well as some publications on the NINGA participatory workshops methods. Many thanks for your attention.